artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hello, welcome to episode 259. What does the ideal integration of humans and technology look like in business in the future? My guest today calls that a Humachine, portmanteau of human and machine. Nada Sanders is a thought leader and expert in forecasting and human technology integration. She has an MBA and a PhD in supply chain management and is an expert in digital transformation, having served on numerous executive boards and a frequent keynote speaker. She is author of 7 books, including The Humachine, Humankind, Machines, and the Future of Enterprise, today's topic, with a second edition in 2023, and was ranked as world's top 2% of scientists in a 2020 Stanford study. She is a fellow of the Decision Sciences Institute, has served on the board of directors of the International Institute of Forecasters, Decision Sciences Institute, and in 2023 she was awarded the prestigious Robert D. Klein Lecturer Award by Northeastern University. Today, Nada's going to define the Humachine, and we're going to talk about the ideal relationship between humans and AI, Kasparov's law, what skills have atrophied in the younger workforce, how software jobs are changing, and where to set the boundary between AI assistants and human assistants. Let's get into the interview. Nada Sanders, it's a pleasure to welcome you to AI and You. And I'm always fascinated by the stories that people have about how they got to where they are. And you do a lot of work in global supply chain management in particular. We're going to be focusing on your book, The Humachine, and what that means, because that's a particularly exciting definition. Can you give us a brief idea of how you got into doing what you do?
Well, first, Peter, thank you for having me on. I'm really, really excited to be here and be able to share that with you. And you're correct, is that most people, when they're initially starting their careers, end up somewhere where they did not anticipate. So my background is fairly technical. I'm an undergraduate in mechanical engineering. And then you go through this period of sort of searching, what is it? I was working as an engineer, a young engineer, and what am I going to do? And somehow I fell into a PhD program, given my quantitative background. And somebody said, well, you're good at math and operations management / research and supply chain. So I ended up in that. But within that context, I discovered forecasting and I fell in love with it. I really did. And actually, when I was a doctoral student at Ohio State University, it was a course that I took from this visiting professor from Carnegie Mellon, I was a course on forecasting, and he actually was doing, believe it or not, crime forecasting in the Pittsburgh area and working with the Pittsburgh Police Department. And I learned that this toolbox of forecasting methods is something that we use for everything, whether used to forecast presidential elections or climate change or demand for iPhones or products or t-shirts. We have a toolbox where we use to predict the future. And I then, given my PhD and my background, I couple that with enterprises and supply chain. So my work is such that I toggle between, well, we make a prediction of the future and then we build a resilient enterprise in its supply chain in response to that. And this is really kind of a dance that companies have to do, right? They're constantly changing, evolving, and they're doing it in response to what they think the future is going to hold. So that's really what the scope of my work is. Now, when we drill down a little bit, when it comes to forecasting and decision-making in the business context per se, what I learned very early on is that in the business world, it's not just the quantitative models, but rather it's human judgment that overlays on top of that. The two work hand in hand. So it used to be when I was getting my doctorate, we had software and Excel and all of it. And then business managers executives would override those at certain times. So I have a fairly large body of work in terms of how this interplay takes place between human judgment and the algorithms. Well, fast forward to today. Our algorithms today are driven by AI. And hence, what happened in 2019 is I decided to write a book that looked at the impetus, I need to note, was to go into companies and interview executives and to find out what is the latest and greatest that technology can do for these businesses. So it's important to underscore that the motivation was the technology. So I go in, I've got all these interviews that I'm doing without exception, every single company. And I'm talking about large companies, names that are household names. Without exception, every single company said the secret to technological success was people and the culture. And so that began to formulate, and that's where I ended up calling the book The Humachine, because I realized the contours of the future of what business needs to look like. And that is an amalgam, a symbiosis of technology with human judgment. That book came out in December 2019. And then you and I and everybody listening knows what happened in 2020, right? Then we had COVID and we had the lockdowns and all of it. I was asked to redo the book in 2023, post-COVID. The second edition of the Humachine book came out literally just a year ago. So it would have been April 2024. And I went ahead again in 2023 and 2024, did all these interviews with CEOs across the board. And what happened in 2019, remember, is that everybody said, well, it's about people. I didn't know what to expect in these interviews post-COVID. What I found was it was now people, but on steroids. Every executive said to me, the secret now is really in those human skills, relationship building, interpersonal relations, being able to work with people very quickly that you don't know, and overlaying that on top of the AI algorithms that are becoming commonplace. And I would say that where we are today, if we look, and if you look at, let's say, I'm just making this up, but let's say you take Coke and Pepsi, right? I was going to say similar, although I'm sure there's people at Coke and Pepsi that would say, hey, they're not the same. But if they have access, if these two companies have access to LLMs and Gen AI and all the AI, well, that sets the stage. But what makes a difference? The difference is the people element, the ability to build the relationship. It doesn't take away from the use of the technology. It simply adds this very critical layer on top of it. So that's really how I got to this point in the work I'm doing.
So are these companies proceeding on the assumption that they all have access to the same technology, that any kind of advantage they might leverage with respect to that would be quite ephemeral?
I would not say that they are there. I would say that I am there. And that's a whole conversation for a few reasons. Obviously, the primary is cash flow and financial resources. Not every company has the same financial resources. In fact, we see this huge difference. So we talk about capabilities of AI, but the reality of it is these capabilities are very expensive. So I think for where we are today, I would say a lot of companies have a lot of sticker shock when it comes to ability to adopt these technologies. Having said that, I would argue that to get the most use out of AI, they don't necessarily need the latest and greatest, but it's actually knowing how to leverage the AI in a way that gives them the biggest advantage. And it's not going to be the same for every company by any means. When you cut across industry sectors, we begin to think about service, manufacturing, apparel, electronics, small versus large companies, restaurants versus, say, something like an Amazon or a Walmart or P&G. Those are vastly different. And what they need is vastly different. It is very important for these companies to really focus and target what they need and only what they need, especially given the costs.
I just want to interject that it's interesting that you come to this from the background of supply chain management, because purely coincidentally, right now the US is going through convulsions in its supply chains for political reasons. But the Humachine that you define is a much larger entity spanning many more domains. And I think it's a really valuable and critical distinction. So I want to take the time to linger on the high-level concept of that so that our listeners can really get the full understanding of that. So can we start at the very top with a capsule definition of what a Humachine is?
Thank you for asking, because it's really important not to get caught in the weeds. And I think we're all caught in the weeds right now. You had mentioned the supply chain issues, the tariffs, obviously, that we are all watching and what's going on. And we could all get so caught up. So if we just kind of zoom out to answer your question directly, the Humachine is an enterprise that is a symbiosis of the latest technology in human judgment, working in a way that optimizes the advantages of both. And I think given where we are with technology today, technology alone is not going to solve the problems, and neither, obviously, are humans alone. We need to work together. What this symbiosis looks like as an enterprise, in the big picture, those details will vary across companies, across sectors, across size, all host of things. But the Humachine is the symbiosis, the amalgam that I believe, when we zoom out, is absolutely essential for the enterprise of the future and the competitiveness of the future in terms of leveraging human strengths and AI strengths.
And I think labels are critical here because they shape our thinking. We just had an episode where we learned that artificial intelligence, the term, was invented because cybernetics was the word that was in use for it, but that was invented by Norbert Wiener. And if they had used that for the Dartmouth conference, they would have had to have invited him, and they didn't like him. So much depends on terminology. And people have talked about corporations being artificial superintelligences. Can you compare and contrast that with the Humachine?
Yes, there's obviously overlap. The Humachine is, I would say, much more zoomed out and broader and much more simplistic. And let me give you, I think it's an important example. Gary Kasparov, as probably your listeners know, the famous grand chess master, he has something that's called Kasparov's law that I think is kind of underlies the Humachine concept. Now, for listeners, they might not know Gary Kasparov was this undefeated chess master. He was the first person to be beat out by a supercomputer. IBM's Deep Blue lost the chess match to a machine. So subsequent to that, in order to understand better in terms of are humans superior to machines or vice versa, he ended up holding a grand chess competition where the latest and the best computers were invited, the latest and best and the smartest chess masters, as well as combinations of humans and algorithms at this chess event. Who won? Two complete amateur chess players, unknowns, with really a homegrown algorithm, not the supercomputer, not the latest and greatest. Gary studied this And what he walked away from with the knowledge was what he termed Kasparov's law, which was that it's the process of the way humans are integrated with the algorithm that is the key. It is the key element that supersedes and it is better than this grand machine all by itself and the smartest person you could find. It's this interplay of the two working together. As he studied these amateurs with their little homegrown algorithm, it was the way they interacted. That process is really what makes this work. So that process, if you look at large companies or companies that are very heavily automated, that process is going to lean more towards the technology. In other sectors, especially in service sector, smaller companies, the process is going to lean more towards the human, but it is the actual integration of that process. If we could visualize these, I don't want to call them tentacles, but I sort of visualize this sort of structure, amoeba-like structure of humans and the algorithms. It's that process of how they are integrated, knowing when do we lean in towards the human, when do we lean in towards the machine. And in fact, Gary Kasparov happened to be visiting Northeastern University, where I'm a faculty, this past summer. And I was on a panel with him, but I had a chance to actually chat with him. I was very excited. I said, Gary, you've got to tell me, how do you see this now? What do you see the differences? And he said, basically, look, we have to be aware that for the most part, machines are going to be superior to humans 90% of the time in terms of, and we all know, right? In terms of automated processes, ability to process data, all that kind of stuff. But as humans, we have to have expertise to know when to intervene and how with our judgment. And that's going to be the other 10% of the time. And he told me, he said, that is the difference, is going to be the difference between good companies and great companies. And I thought that was extremely interesting. I also think it has a tremendous amount of implications in terms of the domain expertise as humans that we have. How do we cultivate it? How do we make sure that our young people that are coming in understand the nuances of the business in order to be able to work with the machines? That goes well beyond coding, but actually understanding when to override. And that's a whole conversation about, again, that interplay between humans and machines.
I think Kasparov is a wonderful example here because he was the last human to be the best chess player in the world out of all entities. He was the world chess champion at the time when IBM Deep Blue beat him. And after that, the best chess playing entity in the world was a computer. And Kasparov leveraged that defeat to a career that was much more visible and presumably lucrative than what he would have otherwise expected, I imagine. And that was a brilliant demonstration of the application of generalized intelligence. I love where you're going with this because this is about the future of work, which is an entire industry right now. And the thing that we're struggling with so much now is what is this future model of how humans and AIs will work together. We see all of this evolution and revolution happening right now with people using AI in work, but they're using it to do the things that they have always done, only faster and bigger. So they send memos to each other that are now 10 times as long as they used to be because they use AI to pump them up. And now, of course, people have to read these and they don't know which parts they're supposed to read. This is something I've talked about at length many times before because it affects me and
Right, me too.
And all of us. And so in some ways, AI has made the problem of content assimilation and processing at work worse. And so we haven't worked out that symbiosis yet. You are looking at how that symbiosis, that partnership comes about. Can you offer us any kind of hope for how this might proceed in directions that will make our lives easier?
I would like to do that. And I am actively working in this area, and you are absolutely correct. So I think a number of things have happened. I think that for a long time, myself included, I'm a STEM engineer person. And I think so many of us, as we have gotten used to working with algorithms, we're all digitally connected. I think many of us have lost or have atrophied some of these skills that are very much human and the kinds of skills that are needed in the work environment and that are going to be needed. And when I say to you that I'm working, I really very much am. I finished a paper, a very lengthy paper last week, and I'm just sort of slicing and dicing it. And one of the things that I'm very interested in is the not just the work environment and that symbiosis and integration, but also we keep talking about, we've seen like World Economic Forum projects that by 2030, 170 million new jobs will be created with AI, with, I think it's something like only 92 million will be lost. So we're going to actually have a greater need for jobs and so on and so forth. However, the big however is there's two pieces to it. I actually have looked at historically at the digging at every technological innovation that has come about. And yes, with every technological innovation, new jobs were created. The key issue was it was not at the same time. There was a time lag. And this time lag was somewhere between ranged, depending on the innovation, from 5 years to 30 years. So that's great, except that what does that mean, Peter, for me and you? You know? So I think in order to grab on to the jobs that are coming about, I think that everyone needs to actively pay attention and engage in reskilling. And one of those things that I've heard from the executives, and I'm continuing to do this work, and I can tell you, and you and I chatted before we started the podcast, I'm approaching this with utmost humility, meaning I don't have the answers. I am pulling it out and trying to identify. Going in thinking I've got the answers, that's not correct. In fact, I would argue to everyone listening, we've got all these talking heads about the future of work. Nobody knows. And I want to help people. And what that means is I'm trying to connect the dots realistically. And what I keep hearing, I'm talking about last week, the week before, very recently. Executives are telling me that the people they're hiring don't look like the people they'd hired in the past. They're looking for people with skills that are more innovative, creative, different in their background, that have more communication skills. So all of us that are trying to mimic the past in terms of our skill set and background are getting it wrong. We need to really tap into more of these human skills. One of the CEOs that I interviewed that really kind of took a deep dive with me, it's the CEO, his name is Rod Harl. He's the CEO of Aline Candles. Sounds like a small candle company, but they actually make candles for Bath and Body Works, Victoria's Secret, a whole host of companies. And they actually have trainers that come weekly that train everyone in interpersonal skills. I said, what? He said, how to communicate with each other in a meaningful way, how to connect, how to control your emotions. So, we don't lose temper, we can negotiate better. The kinds of skills, again, I think that many of us have allowed to atrophy as we are thinking more in terms of prompts and how do I connect with AI, and less in terms of how do I connect with humans. So those are the things we need to tap into.
You mentioned atrophy a couple of times there, and cognitive atrophy comes in for some attention in your book about risks that we will lose or have these capabilities diminished in some way through over-reliance on machines for analysis. Can you talk more about that?
Yes. And I catch it with myself as well. I have to have a very specific hat on when I'm dealing, and I deal daily with all the different Claude and ChatGPT, you name it. But it's a different way of thinking, and it's a different way as I'm thinking of what those prompts are. And then when I think about it, I don't spend a huge amount of time on social media, but we all know that, and especially the studies of kids, teenagers, and children, it does change the way that we interact. And a number of CEOs have said to me, we're looking for somebody that can look at another human in the eye and be able to shape that human, deliver good news and bad news, offer leadership in a way where I'm not timid, but I'm not doing it on the screen. And I think so many of us have become comfortable to communicate, especially when it comes to bad news on a screen in a digital mode, without knowing how to do it gently and do it in a way where I can actually look at you, read your body language, read your facial expressions, and be able to go back and forth in a meaningful way. These are skills when we take a look at people that are coming into the job market that had their, and I'm not a psychologist, so I don't want to make sure I'm not overstepping here, but we know that a lot of these younger people were locked down during COVID. I saw it with many of my students coming to campus post-COVID, having literally panic attacks coming into the classroom because all of a sudden they're in a large classroom, they're needing to speak. A big percentage of their life was spent locked down or their developmental stage. So those are the things that I've noticed, the atrophying of perhaps the kinds of skills that people that are more in their 40s and 50s and older, they've actually developed these skills. I think somebody maybe who's 21 has not had the full opportunity, and we have to work on that.
Well, I certainly hadn't developed it at 21 either, and that was a long time ago.
That's right.
How is this landing at the HR departments of these companies that are realizing what they need to do there? Can you phrase that in terms of how the HR function is evolving, what sort of new imperatives they're developing, how that might show up in their hiring and retention practices?
Great question. And again, I think when we look at companies, and I mentioned this at the onset, we see large variation based on experience, size. We've got the leaders, the laggers, and it's really important that companies that are not leading in AI not get intimidated and not follow the leader and pay attention. Because I have had the opportunity to speak with some leading companies, and I was really surprised. And a couple of the companies everybody would know, and I don't know, it was informal conversations, so I don't know if I'm at liberty to use their names, but everybody would know. I was really surprised to hear some of the folks from HR saying to me, this was last autumn, saying something to me like, we no longer ask about coding. We assume, listen, you can do Python, you can do R, we get it. Can you communicate? Do you have the ability to speak in public, look at other humans? We're looking for those kinds of skills.
So to just interrupt, what do they call those jobs then? Because it doesn't sound like programmer, developer, software analyst is going to cut it for that sort of job description.
Right. Yeah, and I don't want to say a job title because that's very much in flux right now. And I think when we look at the job market, I think it's a very rapidly changing field in terms of what is being looked at. And so as far as titles, I really don't want to go there. One of the problems that we have had is having so much screening done in HR with the AI algorithms. And so when I say things are changing and reshuffling as we speak, they really are. Many of the companies that I've talked to that are leading are realizing that they can't do a lot of this screening with AI as has been done even just a few months ago. Why? Well, because AI is going to look at applicants that look like what they currently have. But what we're seeing currently is that we need people that look different, and that is going to require a human looking at it. So we still see a number of companies that are using AI to do an initial screen. We are also seeing that this job market very much in flux as so many jobs are being taken over by AI. And I can tell you there's other stuff going on, such as a number of jobs being posted that aren't real jobs. And that's a whole nother issue, ghost jobs, essentially, that are there more of a signal to the market that we're still recruiting, maybe seeing kind of what are the candidates that are out there that are available. And I've seen this with my students as well, where they're finding out that these jobs aren't real. And it's been actually written about as well. And I've talked to people about it. So that's another conversation because it's very much, I would say, very much fermenting ground right now. And I think as a result, I am encouraging everybody to just really focus on their human skills. So people ask me, what is the number one, if you could only take one course, it would either be public speaking, communication, negotiation, because the idea that can you use Gen AI or Claude, I think that the expectation is yes. We are definitely, obviously seeing the advancement in the silo, in the bucket of what's happening with the LLMs and the AI. That is changing by the hour in terms of the capability. Now, granted, we get into hallucinations and errors and so forth. And then you get into legalities if you're going to use it in business. And it depends. I mean, are you in the medical field or are you making T-shirts? I mean, those, depending on the criticality of the decisions in your business, there's a huge variation in terms of how much you can rely on AI and what you need from humans. But what we are seeing is this massive reshuffle of jobs. I encourage everybody to really think about what is the likelihood of their jobs being automated, and then looking to reskill in what we call adjacent skills. So, for example, accounting is a great example of a job category that is quickly becoming automated, but an adjacent skill set that we know with just a few classes, you could go from accounting to cybersecurity expert. That is a category that is in huge need right now. So I would encourage everybody to really look and to explore what are the adjacent job opportunities and how do I reskill for those adjacent categories.
Or for that human contact financial advisor.
Exactly. And you hit the nail on the head of something else, Peter. You said financial advisor. That's a great example of a field that easily automated, financial algorithms, da-da-da. But all of us still want a human to talk to. I've got a financial advisor, Bill. I don't care all the algorithms. Bill may not be better than the algorithms, but he's a person. And when it comes to the financial sector, when it comes to medical advice, I still want a person and a human. I think most of us want that.
For that empathy and human understanding. That's the end of the first half of the interview. Next half is next week. It's a bit of a balancing act because on the one hand, it takes an hour for most interviews to generate something good. And on the other hand, I want the episodes to be digestible. I know every time another 3-hour interview from Lex Fridman drops, I feel a bit of stress knowing that's my commuting time for the week spoken for. As wonderful as his interviews are, I don't want to do that. In today's news, ripped from the headlines about AI, Habemus Papam, we have a new pope. And the new one, formerly American Cardinal Robert Prevost, announced, quote, I chose to take the name Leo XIV because Pope Leo XIII, in his historic encyclical Rerum Novarum, addressed the social question in the context of the first great industrial revolution. In our own day, the Church offers to everyone the treasury of her social teaching in response to another industrial revolution and to developments in the field of artificial intelligence that pose new challenges for the defense of human dignity, justice, and labor. End quote. Next week, we'll conclude the interview with Nada Sanders, when we'll talk about intentionality, integration, implementation, and indication, what to digitize in digital transformation, KPIs and other indicators of success in an AI-first business, and how culture needs to shift in the enterprise. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's AIANDYOU.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.